Welcome to the No Name Brand Podcast. My name is Sashka Hanarappel, actress, singer, dancer, turned brand marketing, sales, and advertising strategist who brands your soul. And each week I bring you an inspiring person or message to help you discover your underdog, turn up your leadership notches, challenge the status quo, because you're fast and furious with a powerful message to share with the world. Thank you for taking time out with me today, and without further ado, let's get our creative and wisdom juices flowing. Alrighty, folks, we are back, and this week I'm super excited. First of all, this introduction is going to be a little bit longer than usual because this is something that I am extremely passionate about. I just had a little bit of a shedding of tears while I told our guest how near to my heart this is. So, bear with me. I may just be a little bit emotional. So recently, I watched the movie The Green Book. If you haven't watched it, please do. It is incredible. And I also happened to, like the universe would, watch an interview with Trevor Noah and Oprah Winfrey. And the movie and this interview really got under my skin. Now, I consider myself a master at my craft. And when it comes to knowing about cultures, behavior, and psychology, but something more, the universe has been stirring something within me, came to my attention, stigmas, and in particular, cultural stigmas. During my preparation for my upcoming event, or fest event, as I like to call it, Women Entrepreneurs on Fire, which is going to debut in Cape Town in 2020, from the 14th to the 16th of February, I've been connecting with South African opinion leaders that may offer collaboration opportunities. And this is where I stumbled by accident across the path of our next guest. In fact, LinkedIn suggested her as a connection. And I didn't even need to search for her. And I was just blown away. Now, our next guest works as a creative, but is a cultural strategist with a master in anthropology. She's not only a TEDx speaker, but also has been featured as a Young Leaders to Watch by Fast Company in South Africa, 2019. So this year, baby. She's been nominated as a top 100 disruptor, freaking love disruptors, voted as a top 8 wonder under 30 in 2019, an actual date, and has been interviewed by local and international media platforms. She's a free spirit with a universal flow for where her work takes her in marketing, advertising, and TV, which she, by the way, just stumbled into. Her bone-deep passion is as an activist, that was a tongue twister, writer, and conversation starter. I mean, hello, if this is not my soul sister, then I don't know what. And she is in the pursuit of creating more intersectional and inclusive spaces and narratives that enable Black women, LGBTQIP+, that was a tongue twister too, and the youth within African context to represent their lived experiences in a way that reflects their true reality, i.e., disrupt the cultural stigma. Now, when I read about this, about our next guest, culminated with my recent viewing of The Green Book, Trevor, and Oprah, something in me sparked. Ka-ching! That no matter what looks happy and okay on the outside, there is some inner turmoil that is killing our soul, especially those that have been shunned out of their communities, irrespective of their culture and race. Now, The Green Book shows how an incredibly talented musician travels as a Black man in the Deep South, who's been hired by white people to play and entertain for them. Now, although he's able to share his passion for his music, although not fully, on the front, his real self is hidden, and the community made him aware to do this too, that he wasn't allowed to sleep in white hotels. The Green Book is what listed what hotels Black people were to sleep in, weren't allowed to use the toilet or eat in the same residence where he was performing. He had to use the non-white facilities. And add to this, he was gay, which he hid. I mean, come on. Cultural stigma. And one sentence in the whole movie struck me where I broke down, and I might just break down now because it's really touched me. And he asked this question, or he more or less shouted this question: if I can't be white enough or black enough, who am I? I burst into tears and had to pause the movie. My kids are like, what's wrong? I'm like, I need to gather my emotions right here. That was just too much. Oprah spoke of her girls in South Africa on The Daily Show with Trevor Noah on how Black people, although they have PTSD, won't admit to this because of the stigma of Black people aren't depressed. Cultural stigmas is real, which is why I'm so thrilled to have our next guest on the show, because she's not only ruffling feathers as a Black woman around cultural stigmas, she's demanding to be heard by her community, in particular, to wake up and be woke, to see the stigmas and to work through them and heal themselves. I'm particularly excited about this episode because I'm not an activist, I'm not political, and I loathe arguments about it. I don't know if I'm not educated about it, but I just don't like getting into arguments. But I am someone who loves to challenge the status quo when it comes to culture, psychology, and behavior, especially when it interferes with you living your life with and on purpose. So, without further ado, let us get this party happening with my next guest, the awe-inspiring and mind-blowing Rebone Masemola. Hello, Rebone.
Hello, that was such an incredible introduction.
And
very
so
overwhelming.
And well deserved.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. So how are you today? Where are you in the world today?
I am in Johannesburg, in Sandton. Yeah, that's where I am today, in South Africa.
So tell me, when did you decide I'm an activist to wake unwoke Black women, and why?
So my activism sort of happened to me in a way. Yes, activism chose me. It's a cliche, but activism chose me. So when I was in university, like almost a decade ago, I was living in a bubble, actually, right? Academia is a very safe space where you get the illusion of integration and that everyone is getting along, people are having the right conversations because there's like-minded people in those spaces. And once I left university, I actually realized that it's such an illusion, right? It's such a small part of the rest of South Africa. It wasn't reflective of the reality out in the world. Because when I started working, I realized that there was still so much disintegration, right? Even in the workplace. Although I work in a creative industry, in advertising and marketing and within the TV space, there's still so much disintegration in terms of people from different cultures and different races and gender specific as well, and sexuality, that one of the things that struck me when I was in an advertising agency was that even at lunchtime, something as simple as having lunch together was not the case. You have Black people sitting over there, and then you have white people sitting over there. It was just something as basic as that. And I don't think anyone did it consciously. It was just kind of like a natural gravitation towards people like yourself. And for me, that was like, it struck a chord because I was from the academia where there was so much integration and you have friends from different backgrounds, and that was just part of life. But in that space, it wasn't really the norm. So it was in that space where I felt very uncomfortable, which is a good place, I guess, right? And being uncomfortable is a good place to be. Because exactly, right? Because you have to, exactly, it's the place of growth. Then I had to examine that reality for myself, what it meant for me as a person. And it was there where I allowed myself to start speaking out when things were not the way they're supposed to be. Because I think the one thing that strikes me about South Africa's advertising industry, and it's still the case, is that a lot of the creative work is usually informed by like dated stereotypes, right? It's not like informed insights. We don't do a lot of work to go and understand like the lives of the people that we try and create work for. It's just quite lazy, really, So those were the things that I started speaking out about. If I saw something that was being done where I thought, that's actually very patronizing to the people you're trying to target with this ad, then I became that person. Or if there were not enough women in the room, and which is a real thing in this industry, because a lot of the creative directors are still white and male, that you walk into a room, there's just not enough women in the room. And it's just like, how are we okay with this?
And the irony,
like something needs to change.
And the irony is that women are the epitome of creation. We birth and create life within us. That is, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, interrupted.
Yeah.
Got really
so that's that's okay. But like, that's where I felt the need to start speaking out a bit more. But my intention was not to become an activist. It was just, okay, so this is what's happening, right? So somebody needs to say something. So I became that person. And I remember I got to a point where everyone in that particular business were just like, that trope that, why are you being that angry black woman, right? Like, just keep quiet. Just like, why do you always have to be that person? And I'm just like, but how are you comfortable with the way things are? We live in a very different country. There's so much diversity in terms of the people that live in this country, and in terms of our target audience, even as people working with brands and products and services, that we need to cater those audiences, but in a way that's honest, in a way that's respectful. We need to acknowledge and make sure that our work shows that we see them and we understand them. Let's not be patronizing. That's not too much, right? It's common sense, but
it is common. And in South Africa, there are 12 official languages. So that's 12 official, in inverted commas, cultures. So
basically
the mindset, the cultural stigma is, or is it still like that? That when you're doing the advertising or the media, it's like, you can do one ad for black people, and one ad is then there's still the English ads, and then there's the Afrikaans ads. So they still segregate that. Has it changed that in the black community that is segregated? Because there's different cultures within the culture. I mean, there's colored culture as well.
So the only thing that's different now is that, well, it's not that different. I think since 1994, the thing that the industry tried to do was obviously to be more inclusive in that way, because obviously now it hasn't really changed as much. So the only thing that was different was that after 1994 and South Africa's democracy, you suddenly had a whole new population of people of color that had access to disposable income. So obviously the industry had to change from that perspective in order to get access to that money, right? From that group of all the people of color that now had money in this country, that were now the rising middle class. And in terms of the creative output, the thing that has been done, and it's very tired because we've been doing this for like the last 25 years, is that the ad would be created in English and then translated into quote unquote vernac.
No.
So the inside doesn't always translate. It's just like, do you have the vernac word for it? But it's not necessarily created specifically for a specific group of people and their culture. So there's no cultural resonance in that way. It's just kind of like, okay, cool. Do you have a vernac word for it? There's some brands that are doing so much better now in terms of actually understanding people, understanding their needs, and tapping into people's cultures and actual insight. But it's still a bit of quite rare, to be honest. Every now and again, that's why we still like love Nando's, because we're just like, they just have it on the pulse, right? They get it, right? Nando's shouldn't be an exception. You know what I mean? In a country, yes, exactly, that has 12 official languages, where probably like 95% of a population is brown people, that shouldn't be an exception. And it's 25 years. There's no excuse.
25 years.
For me, it's been 25 years.
That is true. 95, 94 is when Mandela was released.
No, it was released in 1990. And then 94, the elections happened.
That's it. And we were, because I still remember when I was studying, and there was a competition for creating the South African flag. And that was the year before I left for the UK. And I remember then, oh, wow, geez, 25 years. Come on.
I spent 25 years.
I'm getting old, people. So how was it to go, okay, Rebone, I'm in this situation at the moment. I have a master's in anthropology. I'm shit hot in what I do as a creative, in advertising and media. I put the two together because they're inseparable, in my opinion, the culture and the anthropology and advertising and knowing about your consumer and marketing. And then there's the other side where it's the activist. How was the process of setting that up as a business project?
So initially, it was just a question of, okay, cool. So when I left the agency, the first agency where I worked, which was in, I think, 2015. Yes, that's when I think I eventually, 2016, that's when I eventually left. And I just like had so much to say, because there's like obviously there are a lot of restrictions within a business. Like you can't say this, you can't say that. The business reputation, only few people are allowed to speak about whatever, right? To have some kind of public profile anyway. So once I left the agency, I decided to write an article just sharing my experience as a feminist who worked in an advertising industry that was still predominantly male and white. And that article went viral, got a lot of messages from young creatives who like literally resonated across the industry, from other agencies as well, who were just like, I'm having the exact experience where I feel like I'm not being heard. I have the lived experience of either a Black gay man or a Black woman or whatever the case is in this industry. And I don't feel like the industry itself is designed for people like me, right? So, so the industry never had to change, right? After 1994, it was just like business as usual. The only thing that was different was that, I think this is one thing that happens a lot in this country, is that the institutions themselves didn't change. They just put like a black face or a colored person there or an Indian person there. So that was as well the nature of the industry, where they just like, cool, let's just drop in a couple of Black creatives, and that's diversity, right? That's integration for us. But the way the industry itself was set up never had to change. The people that made all the decisions were still much older white men who didn't even understand the target audience, or didn't make the effort even to understand the target audience. So most of us felt really frustrated with the lack of change and the lack of integration, and we didn't feel heard. So a lot of people resonated with that article. So as a result of it, I ended up doing a lot of interviews and TV and radio and all of those kinds of things. That's how I got into the space, basically. So I was just like, whoa, okay. So I have a voice, and like people really share that experience. What was I going to do about it? So I decided to start a blog, which is called Woke Project. This was just supposed to be like, my thing. I'm just like, cool. If I have things to vent about, in terms of women's issues or whatever challenges I face, I could just like share that with other people, and other people can also send them through to me, and I can just post them on the site. That was the idea for the project. But it was never really meant to be anything really. It was just like, okay, cool. It's a nice thing to have. But once I started it, it actually like grew legs, and people resonated with the platform. They loved the content because it was something different for them. It shouldn't have been anything different, because it was like, it's 2017. Like, come on. We should have a diversity of voices already out there, because we've been doing this, because at the time it was like probably like 23 years into our, 22 years. Yeah, it was 2017. So yeah, so the platform itself was like such an amazing challenge and a really good experience, where I started having interesting conversations around, gender and sexuality, and the intersections between that and race, and all of the different dynamic and positions that people occupy in the world, especially marginalized communities, and the role of class and poverty and all those kinds of things. And then eventually I was like, okay, so people love having these conversations online, but I'm sure you've noticed this as well. I think it's a global problem now. The call out culture on social media, where I'm an academic, so I have access to language around sexuality, around race. I know how to speak correctly, if you like, or PC about certain things. But not everyone has access to that. And I think social media masks or creates an illusion that everyone is learned in that way, or everyone has moved on consciously, and everyone is educated enough to speak in a way that's acceptable, if you like, about all of those different types of issues, where people are afraid to ask questions, because then I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to ask a question in a way that it might be interpreted incorrectly, and then I get trolled and people think I'm problematic, blah, blah, blah. So there's that fear where there's not really enough conversation online unless you have the language and the expertise to speak in an informed way. So I decided to then start an offline space called Woke Saturdays to create a safe space for conversation, right? Where you can actually ask questions in a way that's more accessible, in a language that's more accessible, right? I'm an academic, so even when I write, my writing style is a bit very academic and not always very accessible. So this offline space in the world was to create more access to people. And the people that I would meet up with at those events that I've now created are completely different from the people that actually I would engage with online. And they would generally ask questions that, like a few years ago, I would have been really uncomfortable with, because I'm just like, I would have thought, you should know this stuff. How are you not informed? How are you? So I've had to learn to be a little more patient in not assuming everyone understands the same things that I do, and allowing people to ask questions, to feel safe enough to ask questions. So that's how I went into this activist space. And then obviously, because there's not really a separation between activism and creative, or the creative part of my life, it was such an easy relationship for me, right? In a sense that I work with activists, but also because I'm an academic, I work with a lot of academics, but I work within the creative space. So I work with a lot of creatives. And all of those different parts of my life need the other to coexist. At the time, they worked in isolation, right? You have creatives creating stuff in their little boardrooms there with no actual real insights. You have academics doing all the research, sitting with all the knowledge. And then you have the activists who actually do the groundwork every day with the people. They understand the cultures, they understand the needs, they understand the cultural dynamic. So I realized that those things actually can coexist, especially for the creative guys that eventually create mainstream products that we all consume and then get our ideas about other people from. That if you bring those three different parts of my world together, that's actually such an amazing thing, right?
It is.
Because then the creative person, exactly, it's such an amazing collaboration. So that's what I encourage, right, at those spaces. Because then you'd have the creatives come, you'd have the activists come, you'd have the academics come. That's a space for collaboration. That's an opportunity for collaboration. If as a creative you're trying to create, which is something that brands are doing now, to create conversations around gender-based violence for some of their brands, you have the activists in the room to help you create something that's more informed and that's sensitive, but still delivers the message, right? You have the academic who's also in the room, right, with the insights to say, cool, so here are the numbers. One, how many people, actually suffer from gender-based violence, in the silence, the stigma, all of those things, that it all culminates into an informed output that serves everyone's interest.
And using the media for positive education. I can't remember, it was someone I interviewed, I can't remember who it was, and because they grew up watching TV, the stigma was that the person on the television was always white. So the perception was, I can't remember who it was, a television presenter can only be white. So the perception was, I want that, but I can't have it because it's only white. And bringing that together in a room with the creativity, with the knowledge, and with the activism. And what I love is that there was no plan. It was just like, hang on a moment. I need to go with the energy of this. I need to go with the intuition of this and move forward with it. And where it's taking me, not oblivious. You don't want to be oblivious to what's happening, but just knowing I'm still in control of this, but I'm going with the flow and surrendering to what the purpose is, whatever the purpose is over there, where it's taking you.
That's the thing, right? And I struggled for a long time, actually struggled with trying to bring those things together, those parts of my life together, because it felt like such a big separation. And since I started my own project and then thinking about the ways in which, because I was like, great, like marketing is not, like it's not all bad, right? Advertising marketing is not all bad. Because for a long time, I was like, okay, this is just, the industry is just superficial because it's not, the work we create is not informed by anything. It's just whatever the case was. But I was like, okay, actually, that's an opportunity, right? Because I know it doesn't have to be that way. That's how it's been done.
Exactly.
But it doesn't have to be that way, right? And eventually, like, things just sort of culminate. Things kind of like work and come together in very unexpected ways. And I realized that I didn't actually have to choose one or the other. Like I can do both. Like the creative part of the industry needed to live in existence or concurrently with the activism part of it. Because statistically, if you think about it, right, a lot of researchers have looked into it, is that young people, millennials and the next generation, they're a lot more conscious, right? They're a lot more ethical consumers. And that's important. And advertisers need to be able to recognize that in order to create brands and products that resonate with that consumer.
Exactly.
And the only way to do that is to then understand, okay, great. So what does that look like? Why are they conscious? The how and the why. And you understand that by understanding their lived experience and immersing yourself into their needs and their goals and all those things. And activism and anthropology or academia in that way allows me or gives me access to those insights to then kind of like create creative outputs that resonate with the people. So it doesn't feel like an ad. It feels like, okay, great. This is some really great storytelling. And just to your point about seeing ads where you think, okay, cool, to be a presenter means you only have to be white. Representation is a very important aspect, especially in the media. Because one thing I realized in the last couple of years is that you can't expect people to aspire to things they haven't seen, right? I need to be able to imagine myself doing a thing to be able to kind of like build or work towards that thing. So if I see people that look like me on TV, then I know actually that's okay. So this thing is doable, right? And for the longest time, it's always like such a cliche. We're like, okay, great. When you grew up in the township, young boys always wanted to be football players because you had Orlando Pirates in the township. You have Chips. You have all of these like football clubs in the township. So young men can resonate with that. They see themselves playing football because they see football players around them that look like them.
Yeah.
So I think the same thing applies to the media and like different forms of careers within the media, even stories, right? That when we create stories that represent people's lived experience, then they see themselves in that way. They resonate and they're just like, okay, cool. So, I can be that person as well. That thing is actually also meant for someone like me. It's not just for other people.
Yeah.
I can also do that. Also attainable for me.
So if I can sum it up in a nutshell, because I like to sum things up.
Yes.
It's that you changing things in the world by speaking up, by giving a voice to it.
Yes.
I know when I first moved to Austria, I had to tone down a lot when I arrived in Austria because I was just too much. I mean, South Africa's loud. There's people screaming at each other across the road, and it's just like you get very passionate about something and take everything personally. So I had to calm down a lot. And I'm passionately a dancer. I mean, I've been doing it since I was 5, singing, dancing, acting. So when I arrived, everyone goes, I wish I could dance like you. It's like all the Africans can dance. And I'm going, not everyone in Brazil can do the samba. And I was like,
yeah, exactly.
I was like, doesn't work. Like, just because I'm from here, like, I envy, like, I really want to be able to sing, but I'm not Whitney Houston. Like, that's just, those pipes don't belong to me. And just that stigma of how, so by bringing it to the surface, which is what you're doing, especially with the Woke Saturdays, you're bringing it to the surface, and just that is where the cultural stigmatism changes or shifts, where people go, oh, hang on a moment. That perception that I had is actually just something I put in my mind myself. I have the choice to actually change it, shift the focus and go, oh, I can actually be whatever I want.
Exactly, because the most important aspect of those events is self-examination. I think even as an activist, I always struggle with this, is that most of our work involves us being gatekeepers, right? Holding other people accountable for their actions, whatever those actions are. But we don't always take the time to self-examine because we all have some internalized biases, right? We all have a lot of work to do. Exactly. We all have a lot of work to do on ourselves to unlearn. So I try and make sure that, those spaces are a lot more about self-examination, regardless of where you are in life, but also just allowing people to speak for themselves. I think I always struggle with this, is that because I work within the women LGBTI and like youth space, there's always an expectation that you are the voice of the people, right? You as a person. I'm just like, I can only speak for myself, right? I can't speak for the next person, right? Even if the young Black girl that probably grew up next door from me, the experience is probably completely different from mine, right? So one of the things I had to come to terms with was that I can't speak for all people, right? Even though I represent very specific or marginalized groups, I can't speak for all people. So part of my role is to create spaces that allow people to speak for themselves. And I always say that even though I'm a young Black woman and who lives in this country, like not all young Black women have the same lived experiences I do, right? Even the girl next door who I grew up with throughout the years probably has very different story to tell about their lived experience, even if we grow up next door from each other. Even a great example is that part of my owning up to my own privilege is the realization that I'm a university educated Black and middle class woman living in Sandton. That's my privilege, and I need to own that. So obviously my experience is going to be very different from a young Black girl growing up in the rural KZN somewhere, because obviously we had very different experiences. So part of my own process is to acknowledge that and unlearn my own biases. So I can't represent everyone. That's always my big thing, is that I can only speak for myself. Often when you own your truth, yes, other people can resonate with your story, but I can't speak for them. Like I'm not a representative of all young Black women in this country. So part of my responsibility, part of my responsibility is then to create spaces that allow people to represent themselves, right? With Woke Saturday. So that's one thing that I do, is that I say I'm a facilitator of the platform, and every event has a different host, depending on what the conversation is. So we did a conversation last year on Women's Month in August, we do that in South Africa on the 9th of every month, where we focus mainly on the experiences of trans Black women in this country, right? We never have conversations around what it means to be trans, either as a trans man or a trans woman. It's when we hear those stories, it's usually from the US or whatever. Exactly. So I was like, okay, great. So exactly, right? When we're like, cool. So what is your experience as a Black trans woman in this country, right? It's Women's Month. So I created that platform where I was like, cool, we're going to have a trans woman to come and host the event to speak about the experience of trans women. So depending on what the conversation is, I prefer to have people with the lived experience to come host and speak about that lived experience, as opposed to, having me speak about, other people's lived experience, because I can't speak about it credibly and authentically because I haven't lived it. I can understand it from an academic standpoint, but authenticity comes from a place where you have people in the room that say, cool, I've lived it and this is how it is. And it's my responsibility to come there and learn and ask questions. I have any questions, and that's all I can do.
Yeah,
that's all I can do. Really.
As a visionary, because you're seeing things, for lack of words, when someone like that is in the room like that, I mean, that's somewhat of that stature, you see things and you see the consequences. So you're asking the questions of the consequences that someone might be thinking or feeling but don't know how to formulate. So you are kind of speaking for them because of the academic, because you have the visionary sight to see ahead of things. So that's quite a bit. So how do you, or where do you find your inspiration?
So I'm an obsessive reader. I have like stacks and stacks of books, even though they cost a lot of money. So I read a lot across the spectrum. And I watched a lot of videos where I'm just like, wow. Like everyone, I love TED Talk. It was just like always such an easy, accessible content or inspiration on a variety of different things. Because I have different kinds of interests, right? Even though I'm an activist and a creative, I love learning about psychology and, about innovation and technology, and those kinds of things inspire me. Robotics, other events and art exhibitions to like meet other passionate young people who are making an impact in the world. And there's so many, right? They're creating such amazing, there are so many. And it's just like, even just the African continent itself, it's just like such a hub of creativity. And when you live in Joburg, there's so many like people from different parts always have a lot of human condition. So that inspires me, just spending time with people, reading a lot, watching videos, and I run. It helps me clear my head, and it just puts me in a very different space as well to just think differently about things. And That's my creative. Those are the things that inspire me.
Yeah, I love that. And that's South African. Whenever you get to sense like, yeah, that's what it's.
Yeah, that's what it is.
I love it.
Yeah, man.
Oh, man. So we're coming to the end of this, unfortunately.
Yeah.
My editor's always like, keep it to 30 minutes. I'm like, okay. So I have two questions that I ask everyone. And one of them is, how do you want to change or challenge the world doing what you're doing?
Ooh, a little bit more empathetic. I honestly think across the board, it's not even just the South African problem, right? You've seen this all over the world, that there's a lot more leftist politics, and there's been a death of debate or a death of conversation between people that disagree on things. Like, there's no longer room for debate and disagreement in a way that we can still be, okay, cool, we disagree, but we can still get along. Like, we don't have to agree, right? Because there's a lack of empathy. Like, we've stopped caring or trying to get access to other people's experiences. And when we don't have access to other people's experiences, we can't empathize with who they are or their perspective. Even online, even, right? It's just like, when I make an argument or if I say something and somebody else disagrees with me, instead of actually listening to me and hearing me, they're just standing there waiting there to rebut my argument instead of actually like listening to what I have to say. Even in person, like, I realize like I have a lot of those moments where I'm just like, so I don't feel like you hear me, I don't feel like you see me, because you're just waiting to put in your 2 seconds or whatever, your 2 cents.
Oh no, man.
On like stereotypes and all those kinds of things. For me, it's from that point of view. It's just the complete lack of understanding, the complete lack of empathy. And I'm hoping that by creating these spaces and these platforms that allow a diversity of people to have voices, to speak for themselves, and to an extent collaborate with people they wouldn't otherwise have collaborated with or haven't actually had access to, then it creates a space for understanding and a created space where, I try and understand where the other person is coming from. Because it's easier, right, to dismiss somebody who's on the internet, because I'm like, I don't know you, I've never met you, so I don't really care, right? There's like inconsequential in that way. But when you push people into the physical world and they're there and I'm a human, you can see me, I'm right in front of you, it's a lot harder, right, to just dismiss me. I hope it's a lot harder to just dismiss people when you meet them in the world, right? That,
some people are like,
kind of it's just like, oh, I'm out of here. But like, just that, like, create a space for empathy and understanding that we don't have to agree, but we still have to respect each other. We don't have to agree. We just need to relate on a human perspective and just understand each other as human beings. Not necessarily as like,
Rebone is my second half. Oh my God. This is how I think. I'm like, that's why I don't get into politics. I don't get into arguments, because I'm going, well, that's your opinion. Doesn't mean I have to believe it. It's just your opinion. So
and that's right. Exactly. And
I don't need to change it.
Precisely. And that's okay. People should have opinions.
Okay. So we're going on to the last question. These are 3 of my 5 values, and I'd like to hear your take on what they mean to you. So creativity for you is?
Creativity for me is authenticity and credibility.
Credibility, that's cool. Wisdom for you is?
Oh, wisdom. That's a tough one. So wisdom for me is just, lived experience. It's less about age, it's less about how much knowledge you have in terms of academic knowledge, but just lived experience. To me, that's wisdom.
I love that. Passion for you is?
Oh, passion is life. Passion is life. For me, passion is the thing that keeps you up, the thing that helps you wake up in the morning when it's just like difficult and it's just like, not I have to do this again. It's just the fire that keeps you going, keeps you alive, it keeps you hopeful.
I love that. Rebone, thank you so much for being with us here today and sharing your wisdom, your creativity, and your passion with the audience, and around cultural stigmatism and just being aware of empathy and not having to be right in everything, because it's not about being right or wrong. It's just being on a human level and having that empathy between one another. Thank you for honoring your own empathy, honoring your own purpose and passion and wisdom and creativity and putting it forward. And yes, you are a voice for a lot of people, and for honoring that as well. You can find out more about the Rebone in the show notes, where her website is, her favorite book, her favorite quote, where she is on social media, and you can get in contact with her. She's amazing. And I hope to see her as well at our Women Entrepreneurs on Fire in Cape Town. Very excited about that. We're going to discuss that now after this interview. You'll have to wait and see.
Thank you so much. This is amazing.
It's a pleasure. And to all the listeners, remember to be fast and furious and to be the change that you want to see and feel in the world. And I shall see you again next week. Love you lots. Bye-bye. Dang, that was just supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. I enjoyed having you on board, and please do me and you a favor. Head on over to iTunes, SoundCloud, or Stitcher. Click subscribe, and a super bonus, leave your review and you stand a chance of being announced and advertised on the show. I'm always striving to ensure that your brand is uplifted and empowered. Remember, done is better than perfect. So be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and send in your feedback too. You're the absolute best. Keep rocking.